We want to really dive into, what do you see in leadership? Like, what do you see? What sort of habits do you see that these guys have or don't have?
Mm-hmm.
And what kind of makes, in your eyes, what makes up a good leader? Because I mean, you're dealing with these guys on a daily basis
Mm-hmm.
and coaching them as well. So.
Mm-hmm.
And the question I'd like to ask you, or before we get started, is there a way that we can kind of present the conversation to where it would help you as well? Is there something to help you, telling you about what you're doing in business? What is it that we can talk about that would help you?
Look, my business is a headhunting business. So organisations have got executive leadership vacancies, and it's also a coaching business where I'm coaching senior executives through their job search. So it'll all come out in the wash.
Cool.
Okay, good.
Awesome.
Cool. All right, good. So we usually breathe it in to get into the zone. And feel free to join us if you'd like to. You don't have to.
Sure.
Okay. So welcome to the Breathing Edge podcast. And this is another one of our series that we're doing on the Energized Leader. And we have, I would say, one from what I know, and I don't know, maybe Richard, you can kind of fill me in on what I know and what I don't know, but one of the top executive, I don't want to call it headhunting, but it is headhunting. Yeah, but you're working with getting some of the top leadership positions filled in the executive space, as well as coaching those leaders on how to best take their next steps in their business career. Would that be right?
Yeah, that's definitely right. So thanks very much for having me along, and I wear my title of headhunter with pride.
Good.
And I say to organisations, you're either invited to lunch or you're on the menu.
Well, that is the space in which you are playing in. Sure. So I want to ask you, how is it that you've been doing this for so many years? Because you got started quite a few years back, and how is it that you're still, after quite a few years, still on the on the top sort of rungs on headhunting?
Oh, look, I fell into recruitment in my mid-30s. I was completing an executive MBA, and like most people doing an MBA, started to think, what do I want to do when I grow up? And I kind of just fell into recruitment by accident. And I've now been in the industry for, getting close to 20 years. I've had my own business for 10 years. And look, it's been a very challenging space. There has been a lot of technology disruption, particularly through LinkedIn. The market is becoming, a lot more competitive. The value proposition that recruiters used to offer is more of a commodity now. So it's about constant reinvention. So, over the 10 years of my business, I've launched a number of new services to try and break the traditional paradigms of recruitment, and also to keep myself mentally stimulated and excited about working in this space. But, the reality is probably I'm 51 and I'm unemployable. So...
I hear you.
Shane's 41 and he's unemployed.
Yeah, the same thing, Richard. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so I'm curious to know, Richard, so working in such fast pace, I mean, recruitment itself is known, especially when you take it to the next level of headhunting, there's a lot of energy involved. There's a lot at stake. Yeah, it can be. How is it that you sort of survive or thrive in this fast paced sort of a space that you work in?
Oh, God, I'm the absolute worst person that you could ask. I drink and I don't eat well, and I'm overweight, and I really badly hurt my neck last year, so I've been unable to train. And so, so look, I don't have any particular regimen other than I just enjoy the work, and I'm just constantly busy. I do a lot of things in my private life which are not a daily practice, but for example, I've done 7 10-day Vipassana retreats. I've done a week retreat called Path of Love. I've done that twice as a participant, and I've done that as once as on staff. I lived one weekend a month for 4 years in a Buddhist monastery. So 1 weekend a month for 4 years. Yeah. So, I think that I have a mindset that allows me to operate in my space particularly well, but I don't have. It's not a daily practice as such. It's more just a foundation upon how I operate.
Yeah,
and that's important. And that's important. Like I want to that is not something. What you just described there is not something that everybody would go and do either, Richard.
For sure.
To take that time out. So if your superpower is really, because I don't understand recruiting. Like when I first met you and someone said, "Oh, you're a CEO headhunter, or you do," I was kind of like, "Well, what is that? Like, what do you do?" But getting to know you and getting to understand that you've got to do these things so that you've got great people skills and great connection skills. Is that something? Because to me, it seems like you've got to have, with the people you work with, you've got to have this level of trust that other people don't get to have with those people.
Yep. No, that's definitely true. I've been on sort of I hate the word spiritual because of the connotations, but I've been on a journey of self-discovery since I was sort of a teenager, and I was meditating as a teenager, and I really got into a particular author who I saw speak a few times, named Stuart Wilde, who is dead now, but his philosophy was very much in the Taoist space of you need to put your ego underneath. He talks about the Taoist sort of reverence for water, and that a water sinks to the lowest level, but a water can move a mountain. So I make sure that when I'm in an interaction with somebody, I'm there to honour their greatness. I'm not there to honour my greatness. I also really believe in the law of reciprocity. And so if I can be of service to people and be a trusted advisor, even if it's not a transaction, then at some point, they will either reciprocate or, the universe will reciprocate for me. So there's a lot of people in my space who are very, very arrogant and very egotistical, and they make a lot of money, but I don't imagine they have the sort of satisfaction that I have from doing a lot of things which are not purely making money. So, for example, I recruit board roles for not-for-profits for free as my way of making a social contribution. I run breakfast workshops for CEOs every month. The first Wednesday of every month at the Brisbane Club is come and have a beer with Triggsy. So, the last one of those 88 people showed up, all C-level people. And people say to me, Richard, how do you say come and have a beer and 88 people show up? And I don't really know, other than the fact that I love beer and they obviously do too. But, to my own financial, I could make a lot more money, and I could have built a much more successful business in terms of size and revenue and all of those kind of things. But I'm 51 years old. When I was turning 40, I was on definite track to be CEO of a very significant recruitment business, and I went and did Path of Love. I walked in as an aspiring CEO, and I walked out as I definitely do not want that in my life at all. And so it takes a lot of courage to truly be introspective and to be in an environment where your sense of self is being questioned and having to come to grips with this mystery that is life. And definitely sitting in complete silence for 10 days or going and doing a very cathartic experience like Path of Love is it's full on, but incredibly rewarding.
Now there's a lot of gold in that, Richard, and I want to thank you first of all for sharing so openly with us. And what you said about taking the time to be, and having the courage to be introspective, like you said before, you may not have the everyday health regime, but you've got the courage to be introspective, and I think that is a very important aspect to anybody who wants to take a next step and looking at the next level for self-discovery. And I want to say, would you say that that's probably is that like the main thing that has supported you in kind of keeping your head straight while being in this business, or is there anything else that you do that kind of helps to support that too?
My philosophy is very, very different, to I would say the vast majority of people that I know. In fact, to the point where a lot of the stuff that I live my life by is not things that I would openly talk about, because it's just too far outside of the paradigm for. I think that largely what I try to do is to be a detached witness. Enlightenment is the ability to witness attraction or aversion. So if you talk from Buddhist philosophy, the suffering in life is because we have things that we're attracted to and we have things that we're adverse to, and because of that attraction and aversion, it creates pain. And an enlightenment philosophy is to be able to detach from that and say, whether there is suffering or there is enjoyment, it all is the same thing, right? And so if you go and do Vipassana and you're sitting there and you can't move a muscle for an hour and you have this incredibly intense pain in your leg that you think, God, I want to cut my leg off, right? Have you guys done Vipassana before?
No.
Not the way you have.
Yeah.
It's on the bucket list.
Yeah, I've heard you talk about it before, and it's definitely, I thought if Triggsy can do it, I'm going to bloody.
All right, well, we can challenge each other to things. You sit, so once you've been there for a few days, then for 3 1-hour sittings a day, you sit in posture and you cannot move for an hour. And we think about it, you sit in a chair, you're uncomfortable, you stand up, you're uncomfortable, you sit down, you want to lie down, your leg's sore, you move your leg, whatever. Suddenly you're sitting there and you're having to witness, for me, particularly excruciating pain in my right knee. And over the course of this experience, you start to be able to detach from the pain, and you do that by saying, well, is it strong pain? Is it in a specific area? Is it broad pain? Is it fire or pins and needles? And before you know it, you're not attached to the pain, and the pain just goes away. And suddenly you're sitting there for an hour without moving a muscle in a room with 80 people. And you get into a state of, transcendent bliss. It's absolutely incredible. And so bringing that into my life, I'm conflicted in that I know that if you set goals, that you have something to aspire to and work towards a goal, but there is an attachment to the achievement of that goal. Whereas if you are able to say, whether my business succeeds or fails, whether my relationship succeeds or fails, whether I damage my neck training or not, or whatever it is, if I'm a detached witness, then I have an ability to be above all of that. It's very, very hard to live in that space, and it's certainly, but if you said to me, oh, Richard, what's your business plan? I don't know. What are your goals for this year? I don't know. What's your budget? I don't know. I don't have those things. I come to work. I be of service. I want to be happy and helpful. So people say, well, what's your goal? I just want to be happy and helpful. If I'm happy and helpful, then I trust that all will be well. Then the tax man says, give me $80,000, and I go, oh shit, I should have had a goal. Yeah, so, I think that is so different to how we are, even in the coaching environments that you and I work in, that is such a polarity to what is true, people would think is the right way to run a business. I leave myself open to discovering and accepting what presents. Yeah.
And how does that carry over? Like when in our experience, we've worked with CEOs and we work with people that are in those high power positions. They've got very little time, right? Like they're very time poor. And so introducing concepts like what we're talking about now, sometimes people like I find this, sometimes people it seems like they don't have the bandwidth to take on anything else. So when you're coaching and when you're talking to these C-level execs and the people that you work with, how does that come across to them? Or do you not coach in that way? Do you bring these things into the space when you're working with them?
Not so much. I mean, the thing about it, people go, oh, well, C-suite executives and, they earn all this money, they've got these massive jobs and so on. But as I kind of cheekily say, their kids still hate them. They've got the shits with their partner and they're about to have a colonoscopy. So, the reality is...
Normal people.
Yeah.
And so I think that... what I try and do is create a space that when they come in, that they can come in and drop to a degree the mask and just be real, right? And I think that they truly want people to be a trusted advisor. So I have no problem at all in pushing back. I imagine the same as when you're coaching and in your sort of military sort of PE type career. I'm questioning assumptions all the time. So I coach people through their job search where people are coming in, and I had a guy this morning, I'm just about to turn 50 and I don't think that I'm going to be able to get the job that I want because I'm too old. And so that's an assumption. Or, I've worked in this space for the last 20 years. I don't really want to work in that space anymore, but I don't think I've got any choice. Well, that's an assumption. So I encourage people to be intelligently optimistic and to give them the tools and support to enable them to make that move into their next career. I'm not a coach in terms of I don't coach people in their work. So it's a very one-dimensional coaching experience. I'm coaching people who say, I want to find job of choice with employer of choice as quickly as possible. And I say, okay, great, let's strap a rocket to your job search, because the entire traditional paradigm of search and recruitment, it just doesn't work anymore. So, I hope that people, when they come and meet with me or they come on my podcast or they come to one of my events and so on, they say, Richard's a good bloke and he is very genuine and I trust him. That is enough of an outcome for me.
Yes.
And that's definitely, look, that's definitely something that I've heard from the people that know you. And I'm the first person to want to check people out and things like that. So we have heard that about you. So it's working, Richard.
Not only that, I mean, you're on the board for the Brisbane City Symphony Orchestra, aren't you?
Queensland Symphony Orchestra.
That's the one. And you sit on quite a few advisory boards and supporting your local community.
So firstly, I'm not on the actual formal board of the QSO. I'm on their advisory board.
Right, yes.
Which is a bit different, but fundamentally I'm still, very associated with them. I don't sit on any other boards because having sat on a number of boards of not-for-profits, having a 3-hour argument about should we buy a water cooler or not, I'm quite frankly not interested at all. So I'm very happy to support not-for-profits in attracting board members. But what I am, I'm a member of the Brisbane Club. I'm an ambassador of the Brisbane Club, and I'm the convener of their not-for-profit special interest group. So as a result of that, I'm talking to boards and executives in the not-for-profit community all the time. I was just thinking, as you're talking there about a recent incident that happened to me. So a few weeks ago, I was down in Byron Bay, and I one morning got incredible chest pain, like excruciating chest pain. I was down there with Michelle, my partner, and she became really worried, and this persisted for 15, 20 minutes, to the point that she took me to hospital, and we went into the emergency room, and they did blood tests and ECGs or whatever they did, or their medical. And at no point at any stage did I have any fear of dying or nothing. Sorry, excuse me. I think when you're in a place that you can just be a witness to that, it's incredibly freeing. There's a lot of freedom in not being attached to this meat puppet, and so that's not about how much money you've got in the bank, or whether you've got a six pack or not. But it works for me.
I think that's a very valuable lesson too, because it's so interesting. There's so many different things that we can do as humans to, unlock energy or to be a better human. And you're the first person that we've had on the series of interviews that has spoken about the detachment from the meat sack, so to speak, and how freeing that can be. And that I think is something that shouldn't be taken lightly, because the more that, just in listening to you and your experience of detaching from the physical body, how that gives you the ability to then kind of rise above any reaction or rise above any emotional things, which would then make the situation worse.
Yeah, look, I've also allegedly done many ayahuasca ceremonies, and I, so I think all of these experiences, the lesson is that what we perceive to be reality is just not reality. Reality is not me sitting in this desk talking to you, trying to make enough money to pay my bills and so on. It is far more mysterious and esoteric than that. But interestingly, because having done one of your group sessions, which I found incredibly powerful, almost taking me into a space similar to doing an ayahuasca ceremony. And then it is at the absolute other extreme that in a Vipassana environment, it is not about controlling the breath, it's about observing the breath, and so sitting there, and you get to a point where you're breathing so shallowly and so infrequently, and it is such, if you can get into this space, so beautiful. And then going and doing something in your scenario, which is complete reverse. It's like, you're breathing really in a very controlled and very energetic way, takes you into a very different, yet in many ways a very similar headspace. So, there's no right or wrong. It just is what it is in that moment.
I love hearing your experience from both sides. That gives a lot of great perspective. And the question that raises another question is, if you were to take three things, if you can think of three, sort of like either habits or things that you do to take you to another level, sort of in self-discovery, or it could be in dealing with people. What are the three things that kind of move the needle the most for you in your journey of self-discovery?
I would say right now, one of the things that I'm finding really incredibly good for me is listening to podcasts, and in particular podcasts like Joe Rogan, not necessarily when he's bringing on his UFC guys, but he's bringing on scientists and people who are just talking about things that just absolutely blow my mind. And Sam Harris is another one who's got an amazing podcast talking to similar type people, and coming to a realization that, what we think is true and what we were educated about while we were going through school in terms of history and evolution and current thinking and particularly, projecting to the future in terms of artificial intelligence and, all of these things. I find that so fascinating. And I think that one of the things is when I sit down with a CEO or whatever, the last thing I want to do is talk about business. I want to talk about stuff that's fun and interesting. And I think that, so listening to those kind of things and reading great books, gives me a broader perspective and it keeps me fresh. Yeah, and even though I don't work in the space of artificial intelligence, for example, I love learning about it, and I love thinking about what the future could look like. When human beings are no longer, the highest, most evolved species on Earth. I think, and again, people go, oh, global warming, we're killing the planet. We're not killing the planet. We're just killing the planet's ability to sustain human life. And that's not bad, in the sense that humans have had their time in the sun. And if the next evolution is artificial intelligence, fine. And if you're not attached to this body and you're not attached to the sense of, this is reality, then who cares if you're alive or you're dead? I couldn't care less. So that's one thing.
I know you don't mean it the way that people will think to see what it means.
No bullshit. Like I listen to many of those podcasts as well, Richard. I agree. I agree with you. I do though think that with AI and with all these things that people take for granted how complex our consciousness and how we are, to the point where it's not. I don't think people think it's going to be that easy just to download it into a machine. They don't even freaking know half of what goes on in the brain.
Oh, of course.
It's
But on the other side of that, I mean, I've even heard Elon Musk talk about, like, what are we going to do with the human species when this happens?
Elon Musk is one of the strongest advocates for controlling AI because he's filled with fear about it, as are many other, very smart people in that space. And look, at the end of the day, what we're talking about in terms of can artificial intelligence become conscious or not, can we download or upload our consciousness into the cloud? I mean, as you say, it's very hypothetical, and could it happen in the future? It may not, but it's just fun to witness all that.
Yeah, 100%. And
I hope. Sorry,
no, good.
They talk about 0-point singularity, which is where artificial general intelligence has got the ability to improve itself. And once that happens, computing power will go through the roof, and the human species will largely become redundant. I really, really hope that happens in my lifetime, because I do, because I really want to witness that. I want to, it could be a Terminator sort of outcome, but so what? And anyway, coming back, look, there is no doubt, Andrew, that when I commit to a Vipassana practice, there are tremendous benefit to that. And when you do Vipassana, you are encouraged to sit for an hour every morning and every night, every day. And I know people who've done that for years and years and years, and it is profoundly obvious that they do. All right. But for me, what gets me out of bed in the morning is, oh shit, I've got to go to work and pay those bills, and crawling out of bed and flogging myself all day, and then going home and doing it all the next day. I don't get into a Vipassana practice, but I suppose I think that because of the work that I've done for so many years, it's that perspective of being able to say, like if I said to somebody, you know, I literally could not care less if I walked out on the street today and was run over by a car and was killed, they would go, what on earth are you talking about? Yeah, how could you possibly believe that? And yet I absolutely, truly do.
Mm-hmm.
You know? Yeah. So, you know, I don't know. I'd love to sit here as a 51-year-old Adonis with a six-pack and $50 million in the bank and blah, blah, blah. But, you know, I'm just like everybody else, just trying to make a living and be of service and, you know, eke out some enjoyment in this very short existence.
Richard, you secretly want to be the Adonis. Come on. You can tell us.
We'll talk about it later.
There's more to you than this. Come on.
I signed up to do this cage fighting program last year, and within 4 weeks I was so smashed. Yes, I should have listened to everybody's advice. Was Richard, you're 50 and you're fat and you're unfit together.
Well, that's all about how you love challenging yourself, though. I think that's one thing that you can that I see that I admire about you is that you're always up for a challenge.
Yeah, well, you know, people say, you know, I run marathons or I've walked the Kokoda Trail or whatever it is. And I say, well, you know, I've gone and sat in silence for 10 days. And they go, oh, my God, how could you do that? You know, and it's like, how can you run a marathon? I can't even. You know, it's, but I think that everybody in their life should go and do a Vipassana retreat. I absolutely think everybody in their life should do ayahuasca at least once.
Especially presidents of nations and leaders of nations, I think.
Well, I was listening to a podcast recently, and one of the guys was saying, if you want a role in politics, the minimum requirement must be you do at least 12 ayahuasca.
Yeah, Graham Hancock. It was Graham Hancock doing to Joe Rogan. Yeah, that was a great episode, that one.
Wasn't that amazing? And,
it was.
You know, and they talk about, you know, we have this perception that, you know, civilization is only a few thousand years ago. And then they go, hang on a second, there were civilizations in the Amazon that we are now finding, or that cave in Siberia where somebody, you know, there were humans or human-like people there 150,000 years ago. Sorry, 100, anyway, whatever the number was. And it's like, nobody hears about that stuff.
Yeah.
And yet you go, wow, like my entire understanding of what is reality is just bullshit.
Yeah. No, I agree with you, and I think we got more to talk about because I've definitely looked into that stuff, and it's really changed the way that we look at things because if in fact there was high technology or high culture. Whereas today, people think that this is the best we've been.
Yeah.
You know, and that might be a mistake, thinking that this is the best that we've got to.
Yeah. You know, this is how I think about it from a really simplistic point of view when I'm coaching people is that, you know, 100 years ago, you went to school, you picked a career, you studied it, you got married, you banged out some kids and you died. And, you know, that might be sort of a 50 to 60-year-old journey, right? Mm-hmm. The reality is now for people, you're a bit younger than me, but for people of our generation, it's extraordinarily likely that we'll live to be 100, right? So we will probably still be working when we're 80, hopefully through choice rather than circumstance. And yet the same paradigm exists. You know, my boy who's in grade 7 is like, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? You know, go to school, pick a career, go to university, get married, and then go, holy shit, I'm still going to be on this planet for another probably 80, 90, 100 years. How ridiculously stupid to have that same education system.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense anymore. You know, I was just listening to a podcast about, you know, genetics, and here's the latest guy on one of the guys on Joe Rogan, and so now I'm reading his book, and he's saying that in the very near future, you know, people will not have babies by having sex. You know, all of it will be done, you know, in vitro IVF style laboratory, you know, picking the genetic markers for disease and for intelligence and so on and so forth. And you go, wow, like this paradigm is I get married to somebody when I'm in my 20s, and if I'm going to be alive when I'm 100, do I really, does it make sense? Do all these things make sense? And I'm not saying people shouldn't be married. I've got no, I've been married and divorced, and I'm in a new relationship now. But we have so many paradigms of thinking that just are no longer relevant. Forgetting talking about, ancient civilizations. If you are 20 and you think I've got to have these goals to make all of this money or whatever it might be, but if you've got a runway for another, you're going to be working for 60 years, I'm 50, that might be half of my life. Whereas 100 years ago, it'd be like I'm retiring now and getting ready to die. Now it's like, well, I could have another whole 50 years. That just blows my mind.
So when you're coaching people in this space, when you're working with your clients, what is like the number one thing that you challenge them on or encourage them to do while they're doing this? Coming from that information, coming from the knowledge of all the...
Well, they think they're too old,
Yes.
A lot of people think
it's funny that, how the paradigm or the pendulum swings. So now there's this saying, I'm male, stale and pale. Have you heard that?
No.
Okay, right. So I'm male, and organisations only want to recruit women, particularly onto their boards, right? So I'm the wrong sex. I'm pale. I'm a whitey. They want diversity. And I'm stale. I'm too old. I'm male, pale and stale, right? And so whereas 10 years ago, 20 years ago, these guys would be going, I'm a champion of industry and now I'm going to get on boards and, and so now they're coming and going, oh shit, I'm male, stale and pale. And it's like, well, that's an assumption. If you attract what the energy that you put out, right? So if the energy that you're putting out is I'm male, stale and pale, then that's what you're going to attract. But what I encourage people to do is become really clear about what are my key achievements and what are my transferable skills, and how can I transfer those skills from one environment to another? People become very pessimistic, and particularly because in this space, somebody's been a senior leader, they've had a large remit, lots of people reporting to them, managing, huge budgets and so on. And then they go, oh, I need to find a new job. And they go and meet with this 24-year-old idiot recruiter, who has no ability to build a trusted advisor rapport with them, who is treating them like a complete commodity, is giving them extraordinarily poor advice. And once these candidates have had this experience multiple times, they start to go, well, maybe there is something really wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with them. They're awesome. It's that they're trying to, they are subjugating themselves to a system which is not there to encourage and empower them to achieve their full potential. All right. But, so my whole philosophy is about I'm empowering senior executives to take responsibility for their own job search and to go out and get in front of their employers of choice before those organisations know that they need them to access hidden job market opportunities. But then people, they're just too scared. Oh, I can't go and approach the CEO of Rio Tinto. What if I send him a message and he doesn't reply? So come on, let's all man up here, or whatever the lady version is, lady up. You would be astounded at how many people who you would look up and reverence and go, wow, they're a CEO and they earn $600,000 and da-da-da-da. And then when it comes to their own career and their own success, they're frightened children. Absolutely frightened children. And they just need somebody to hold their hand for a while. And, I see that as my job. Yeah.
Awesome. That is brilliant. I love that. I actually wrote this down because I think that this can be great for anyone around key achievements and transferable skills.
Yeah.
Focusing on what you're good at rather than, where you got lost.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, you look at, having a military background, Shane, there are people that come out of the military who thrive and succeed in corporate. And there are people who come out of the military and they're completely lost.
Yeah.
You know? And it's like, well, the only difference really is a mindset difference. You've both got the same skills and abilities. You've had the same training. You've got the same opportunity. But one, Campbell Newman, goes on to become Premier of Queensland. But we define our own lives. And yet at the same time, this wonderful juxtaposition is that at the same time, it is completely out of your control. I certainly agree with Sam Harris about free will. There is no free will. But where Sam Harris doesn't take the conversation to, and I'm sure he believes it, but he doesn't want to talk about it, is that, reality is that you are being breathed. You know that expression, right? I think that I'm breathing, but I'm actually being breathed. And it is just universal consciousness. There is no Richard. Really, within the matrix and the dream, there's this perception of duality, but there is, in fact, no duality. There is only consciousness, and consciousness is just experiencing itself through this mirage of ego.
in a meat sack, in a meat puppet.
And that's it, because just in hearing you say that, like, before I even experienced any sort of mindfulness or, going deep into breath practice and being able to experience alternate sort of realities, I would, my first reaction would be like, I'm not, how am I connected to that person when they don't want to connect with me, And the interesting thing is that we are always connecting. And I actually said to Shane, like, I'm sitting next to him, but his physical body is communicating with my physical body. And then, of course, there's words, that we use to communicate it. So there's all kinds of different dynamics of communication happening at one time. And I love what you were saying around the collective consciousness, that there is a collective communication. One, we're all humans, we're not really separate. And as pressures of life begin to happen, I believe that's going to bring us closer together. So it's almost like as the tech space starts taking off, it's going to force humanity to start coming together and working together, because they won't have any other choice, Neely.
Well, if you start to, and I mean, this conversation has gone way. We want to talk to this recruiter about executive mindset.
Let's keep it rolling, Triggsy. Let's keep it rolling. In the matrix level, they talk about universal basic income. So basically, they will pay everybody, a basic amount of money, whether it's say $1,000 a month. So if your mum, dad, 2 kids, you're getting $4,000 a month, which is enabling you to eat and pay the rent and, have health care, because automation and AI is removing, so many jobs, labor, and if those workforces, it's very hard to train somebody who's been a truck driver for 50 years to become a computer programmer, right? So they need to have a safety net there. And so suddenly people will go, well, if I've got enough money to have some kind of middle class existence, that opens up a whole lot of choice for me in terms of, well, do I actually want to pursue being an artist or a musician or just being a parent or being a teacher, or, things that, it gives people freedom to express themselves more. And then I think as, this situation continues to grow until we do reach this point of 0 point singularity, which I truly believe will happen. When, I don't know. David Dugan would say 2038. I think maybe being a bit optimistic, but imagine that. Imagine in 2038, there is this moment of 0 point singularity, and suddenly, assuming that it's not Terminator and everybody, gets killed, suddenly it's like, well, you are everything is being done for you. There is no issues about wealth and equality and so on. What do you want to do with your life? I can tell you right now, I wouldn't be sitting here trying to run a recruitment business. I would probably still work in a similar space, but it wouldn't be
the drivers of money and, you know, and paying bills and paying off the house and all that stuff, it'd be removed, right? So I think it's a fascinating time to be alive. You know, this change is happening at such a rapid pace. You know, they're talking about now, for example, microchips have kind of reached their full potential in terms of capacity to store information. So what they're doing now is storing information in DNA, right?
In algae as well, aren't they? Algae, they're in living organisms now.
Yeah.
That's storing information.
You know, they have 3D printed the first operating heart.
I saw that the other day. That's freaky. In a little glass case.
Yeah. So you know, for example, this whole thing of, you know, fitness and, you know, and eating really well and so on. And then if they say, well, actually, you don't really need to do all that. You can do whatever you want, you know, and then we'll just put these little injections with these tiny microscopic, you know, little medical things in your body. It's just, who knows?
I think there'll be a bigger cost to it than that, Richard.
Well, we shall
you don't know until you get there. You know?
Exactly. You don't know until you get there. And, you know, I remember seeing that Wall-E movie. You know, you've got kids. Have you seen that Wall-E?
Oh, yeah.
Hands.
All the people go up in that spaceship and everybody's really fat and, you know, they're all in electric wheelchairs because they're stuck on this cruise liner in space.
Staring
and you go, you know, that's kind of what's going on.
Yeah. Yes.
It is. I'm laughing because it's kind of
Yeah.
Yeah. I've actually thought about that movie quite a few times.
Right. We're carrying this phone in our hand that gives us access to, you know, every piece of information in the world. It won't be long before that phone is not an external device. It'll be an internal device. You know, it won't be long before if they can 3D print, you know, a heart, they can you know, you cut your hand off, they just print you a new hand, or you've got liver disease. Some woman apparently who had bladder cancers just had a 3D printed bladder to replace her bladder. And I mean, you know, it's just preposterous.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I think that's interesting because I think most people have this fear of change. You know, what they don't know is scary. And so I love that one of your things that you love to do is to push your perspectives and to increase your awareness of alternate things that are happening around the world and and then removing the non-attachment from it. You know, I think that's even. I think that you can't increase your awareness without removing some detachment. Otherwise, I think we'd all go insane.
Well, I mean, you know, what's the worst that could happen? You'll die. Well, you're going to die anyway.
Yeah.
Right. You know, if we don't protect the environment, you know, our kids will die. Well, they're going to die too.
Yeah.
Okay. Who's to say?
Increasing the quality of your...
Richard. Way to put the heart into it. Maybe we print you a new one.
Right. Exactly. You know, who is to say we have this view? You know, if somebody dies at 40, they died so young. You know, we have a view that unless you live till you're 80, you haven't had a successful life. What's wrong with, you know, living until 40? You know, I don't have any religious or, you know, belief in terms of I have no idea about what happens after death or pre-death or whatever. But a baby's born, you know, and then the baby dies and everybody goes, isn't that terribly sad? Who am I to judge if it's sad or not?
Yeah.
You know, everything is exactly as it should be. Why? Because it is.
Yeah.
You know? And if I have a perspective as a detached witness, and I'm not opinionated about, you know, if somebody dies younger than 80, that's bad. Who am I to judge what's bad and good?
Yeah.
You know? If I watch the news and you see these terrible events going on, well, that's really bad. Well, who am I to judge if it's bad? It may be perfect. You know, in fact, it is perfect. Why is it perfect? Because it is.
Yeah. Oh, in the abundance book, they're talking about what's the one that David talks about, the abundance, done by Peter Diamandis, where he talks about it's interesting when you start impacting global change. So, say for instance, if we removed starving children, or people starving, then all of a sudden you have a lot more people living longer, and we have to make sure that the Earth's capacity can house all the people that are now more people living and thriving.
It's just a cause
so
and effect.
So how are we going to, so you save one thing, but then it starts affecting another thing, and all of a sudden you have another problem.
Yeah, the butterfly effect, step on an ant and a polar bear shivers, right? There's a fantastic book. It's called Ishmael by Daniel Quinn. It's a bit old now, but it's a novel about this guy who ends up getting into this relationship with a gorilla who speaks to him telepathically, right? It sounds really weird. But it's an amazing book. And, if you look at animal populations, so let's say, for example, you've got all these kangaroos in this valley and it's a really great season and the grass grows, and so the kangaroos have lots of babies. And then a few years later, there's a drought and there's no grass, and so the kangaroos have less babies and the population expands and shrinks.
Oh, can't hear you, Richard. There you go. You're good. Go ahead.
Sorry. That was bloody Rex Owen.
Calls.
But now we have a situation where there are, desert communities and there are populations there, and we go, we've got to solve the problem. Let's give them more food because they're in famine. So they get more food, so they have more babies. So there's more famine, so we give them more food. So it's completely contra to, what is natural. The environment needs to sustain the population. And so, you start to get into all this stuff, and I find, I never read books about business. I never, I don't read self-help books about, how to be more successful, your Tony Robbins type stuff. I'm just not interested in that. I'm interested in this amazing drama, this soap opera that is humanity. Because at the end of the day, it's just a ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. You see somebody in on a soap opera and they've got all the tubes in and they're dying, and you are engaged in the show because you're enjoying it, but at the same time, it's just an actor. Yeah. And at the end of the set, they clap the board, okay, shot's done or whatever. The actor gets up, goes in the green room, does a few lines of coke and, whatever. It's just an actor, right? And yet in this reality, if your husband or wife or kid or parent or whatever is in this hospital and they're stuck up with tubes and they're dying of cancer, it's like, oh my God, they're dying of cancer. It's just a melodrama.
Yeah.
It's just the Matrix.
Yeah. Do you know that's interesting? Like I totally identify with what you say, and I know that it would probably offend quite a few people, and I would like to encourage people to think outside the box, very similar to what you're talking about, removing and detaching, because when you remove drama, you can then allow life to happen the way it's meant to happen naturally instead of intervening. And I think that, that we can, this is a different rabbit hole we probably won't have time to go down, but as far as, death is concerned, it is an essential part of life. I mean, no human being can thrive without a certain amount of cell death. Shedding of skin and removing of the old. And, it's sort of something that we in our family have started to look at as it's a necessary part of life, and to look at as a way of celebration rather than a way of, sadness or draining energy.
Yeah. Well, if the Buddhists say you should, we celebrate birth and, mourn death, but it should be the other way around. You should mourn birth because here's this entity that's coming into an environment where they're going to age, they're going to get sick, they're going to experience suffering, and then they die, and that should be the celebration. Oh yeah, they've made it through.
Dude,
We have to put caveats on this conversation.
Somebody once said,
Triggsy does have a heart. We know, and we'll print him one if he doesn't. But
somebody once said to this. They said this to me. They're like, if every person that's ever died could actually tell you what's happening on the other side, we'd all be probably laughing to get there.
That's what I say. People go, "Oh, suicide's terrible," and imagine if you die and all those people who have committed suicide go, "Geez, Ange, you idiot. You could have died 30 years ago. This is so awesome over here. Why did you suffer for another 30 years? You should have just bloody shot yourself in the head and come and partied with us."
Oh, man.
I love the paradigm shifts that you're presenting in this podcast, and it's completely expanding perspective, and I'm sure we're going to be challenging some people. Yes. Oh, yes. So I'm looking at the time.
Yeah. So look, I suppose this is not the conversation we neither of us expected, but maybe we need a podcast just to talk about this.
I have been challenged, and I've learned some amazing things, and I've definitely got some golden nuggets around, handling midlife crises and job changes. So thank you very much. It has been very insightful.
Please, I'm not suggesting anybody should go and kill themselves. But should you be killed or about to be killed, be at peace with it, because it's all just a dream.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yep. I love that. Well, thank you very much, Richard, for taking your time to spend this with us and for sharing wholly from your perspective and from your experience. I do appreciate that. Thank you.
Big breath.
Yeah. Thanks, Richard. Loved it.